Hello YouTube, this is Saeed Mirza. Today's talk is based on my book titled Will You Not Reason, which can be downloaded for free from www.willyouNotReason.com. In this book, I present verses from the Quran regarding the existence of God, the inevitability of the last day, and our true purpose in life, which is to serve God alone. I am using the excellent translation of the Quran by Sam Garens, which can be downloaded for free from www.quranic.com. In this talk, I will be giving responses to common arguments made by scholars of the Islamic religion, that is, ulamas, muftis, and sheikhs, when they are told to follow the Quran alone. So let's begin. The followers of the Islamic religion are above all contentious and stubborn. In spite of clear and unambiguous arguments in the Quran to follow it alone, they do not take heed. It is a hard matter for them to abandon a religion they found their fathers in. Certain arguments are put forward by Islamic scholars defending the use of Hadith and Sunnah. All these arguments rely on the premise that the Quran is not complete, clear, or fully detailed. Please view my video on the Quran being clear, complete, and fully detailed, where I expose the falseness of this premise. I will address some of the most common arguments for the necessity of Hadith and Sunnah put forward by the scholars of the religion of Islam. The first argument is obey God and obey the Messenger. Adherents of the religion of Islam, that is, Muslims, are quick to bring verses from the Quran that command believers to obey God and obey the Messenger. Let us reasonably look at how to apply this in our lives today. Muhammad is not among us anymore. He is dead. How exactly are we to obey a person who is dead? We cannot. If the argument is that by obeying the Hadith and Sunnah we are obeying the Messenger, then my response is as follows. Would you equate secondary sources written centuries after Muhammad's death, which he never saw or approved of, to a living, breathing person? This is a nonsensical proposition. The command to obey the Messenger was applicable to all believers who were living during Muhammad's time. Is it not the height of hypocrisy to follow secondary, questionable sources and ignore the book of God that was revealed to him, while claiming to obey the Messenger? Is it not ignoring the book of God if we continue to practice rituals and insist on idol worship in defiance of the clear commands of God? And by idol worship, I am referring to what goes on during the Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca. The Quran has many commandments instructing believers at the time of Muhammad. These commandments cannot be obeyed by believers today as the Messenger is dead. The believers are but those who believe in God and His Messenger, and when they are with Him on a common matter, go not away until they ask leave of Him. Those who ask leave of thee, these are they who believe in God and His Messenger. Then when they ask leave of thee for some involvement of theirs, give thou leave to whom thou wilt among them, and ask thou forgiveness of God for them. God is forgiving, merciful. Chapter 24, verse 62. Make not the call of the messenger among you like a call of one another. God knows those who slip away surreptitiously among you. And let those who oppose his command beware lest a means of denial or a painful punishment befall them. Chapter 24, verse 63. O you who heed warning, enter not the households of the prophet for a meal without waiting for its time, save that leave be given to you. But when you are called, enter. And when you have eaten, disperse. And seek not familiarity through storytelling. That hinders the prophet, and he is shy of you. But God is not shy of the truth. And when you ask of his wives any item, ask it of them from behind a partition. That is pure for your hearts and their hearts. And it is not for you to hinder the messenger of God or to marry his wives after him ever. That were tremendous in the sight of God. Chapter 33, verse 53. The other argument used by those who love the hadith is take what the messenger gives you. Adherents of the religion of Islam, that is, those who claim to be Muslims, claim that God commands us to take what the messenger gives us and leaves what he forbids us. This is a very dishonest argument, as the complete verse is clearly talking about the spoils of war. What God bestowed upon his messenger from the people of the cities belongs to God and his messenger, and to relatives, and the fatherless, and the needy, and the wayfarer, and to them alone, that it become not a distribution between the rich among you. And what the messenger gives you, take it, and from what he forbids you, refrain, and be in prudent fear of God. God is severe in retribution. Chapter 59, verse 7. The next argument is Muhammad explained the Quran. Scholars of the religion of Islam claim that Muhammad's job was to explain the Quran. How can we be expected to understand the Quran if we abandon Hadith? Implicit in this argument is the assertion that the Quran is difficult to understand, which is simply not true. The verses that are cited in support of this argument are, "And we sent a messenger only in the tongue of his people, that he might make plain to them. God sends astray who he wills, and guides whom he wills, and he is the mighty, the wise." Chapter 14, verse 4. "And we sent before thee only men whom we instructed, and asked the people of the remembrance if you know not." Chapter 16, verse 43. "With clear evidence and the written records, and we send down to thee the remembrance, that thou might make plain to mankind what has been sent down to them, and that they might reflect." Chapter 16, verse 44. Muhammad was communicating the clear messages of God. He was making plain to people that if they did not repent, they would be punished by God. Let us look in the Quran to see how the phrase make plain is used. "Thus does God make plain to you his proofs, that you might use reason." Chapter 2, verse 242. God desires to make plain to you and guide you to the established ways of those who were before you, and to turn towards you. And God is knowing, wise. Chapter 4, verse 26. The Anointed One, son of Maryam, was only a messenger. Messengers had come and gone before him, and his mother was a woman of truth. They both ate food. See thou how we make plain the proofs to them, then see thou how they are deluded. Chapter 5, verse 75. It is clear from the preceding verses that it is God who is making plain his proofs to men, not Muhammad. The Quran has many verses detailing the duty of Muhammad. Nowhere in the Quran does it state that Muhammad was to explain the Quran, issue edicts allowing and prohibiting things, or predict the future. "And if they argue with thee, then say thou, I submit my countenance to God, as do those who follow me, and say thou to those in possession of the law and to the unschooled, Have you submitted? And if they have submitted, then have they been rightly guided. And if they turn away, then but upon thee is the communication, and God sees the servants." Chapter 3, verse 20. "And obey God, and obey the messenger, and beware. But if you turn away, know that but upon our messenger is the clear communication." Chapter 5, verse 92. Upon the messenger is only the communication, and God knows what you reveal and what you conceal. Chapter 5, verse 99. "And if we let thee see something of what we promised them, or we take thee, but upon thee is the communication, and upon us is the reckoning." Chapter 13, verse 40. "And those who ascribed a partnership said, Had God willed, we would not have served anything besides him, we and our fathers, nor would we have forbidden anything contrary to him. Thus did those before them. And is there upon the messenger save the clear communication?" Chapter 16, verse 35. "And if they turn away, but upon thee is the clear communication." Chapter 16, verse 82. "In this is a communication for people who serve." Chapter 21, verse 106. "And we send thee only as a bearer of glad tidings and as a warner." Chapter 25, verse 56. "The people ask thee about the hour. Say thou, the knowledge thereof is but with God. And what can make thee know, but that the hour may be nigh?" Chapter 33, verse 63. "So be thou patient, even as those possessed of determination among the messengers were patient, and seek thou not to hasten for them. The day they see what they are promised, it will be as though they had tarried save an hour of a day." Communication. "Then would there be destroyed save the wantonly perfidious people?" Chapter 46, verse 35. "And obey God, and obey the messenger. And if you turn away, then upon our messenger is but the clear communication." Chapter 64, verse 12. Messengers as bearers of glad tidings and warners, that men might have no argument against God after the messengers. And God is mighty, wise. Chapter 71, verse 165. "Say thou, None can grant me protection from God, and I can find no place of refuge besides him. safe communication of God and His messages, and whoso opposes God and His messenger, his is the fire of hell, they abiding eternally therein forever. Chapter 72, verses 22 and 23. I hope that these verses are sufficient for the sincere reader to appreciate the true job of the messenger. It was to warn and to communicate the messages of God to his community. This is also the job of the believers if they want to follow in the messenger's stead. The next argument is that the Quran is difficult to understand. This is one of many arguments advanced by people who are intellectually lazy. Instead of trying to understand the Quran using their own intelligence, they would rather blindly follow the opinions of religious scholars. The religious scholars in turn follow hadith and edicts of previous religious scholars. This is a classic case of the blind leading the blind. God says in the Quran in many places that He has made the Quran easy to understand. We are to apply our intelligence and ponder its verses. There are no shortcuts to salvation. And we but make it easy in thy tongue, that thou bear glad tidings therewith to those of prudent fear, and that thou warn therewith a quarrelsome people. Chapter 19, verse 97. Will they not consider the Quran with care, if there be locks upon their hearts? Chapter 47, verse 24. And we have not taught him poetry, and it does not behoove him. It is only a remembrance and a clear recitation. Chapter 36, verse 69. And we but made easy in thy tongue, that they might take heed. Chapter 44, verse 58. And we have made the Quran easy for remembrance. So is there any who will remember? Chapter 54, verse 17. He it is who sends down clear proofs to his servants that he might bring you forth from darkness into light. And God is to you kind, merciful. Chapter 57, verse 9. The next argument is that Muhammad had special knowledge. Scholars of the religion of Islam will do anything to save their livelihoods. This is evident from the many arguments they use in justifying hadith. If God has willed to misguide a man, then there is no argument that can guide him. An argument that is used in favor of hadith is that Muhammad had special knowledge or wisdom, and that was given to him separately from the Quran. If we ignore hadith, then we lose that special wisdom. This argument, like all other arguments, assumes that the Quran is not clear, complete, and fully detailed. The verses that are pointed out in their favor are, like as I sent to you a messenger from among you, reading to you our proofs and increasing you in purity, and teaching you the law and wisdom, and teaching you what you knew not. Chapter 2, verse 151. God has shown grace to the believers in raising up among them a messenger among themselves, reciting to them his proofs, and increasing them in purity, and teaching them the law and wisdom, and if you were before in obvious error. Chapter 3, verse 164. He it is who raised up among the unschooled a messenger from among them, reciting to them his proofs, and increasing them in purity, and teaching them the law and wisdom, though they were before in obvious error. Chapter 62, verse 2. A superficial reading of these verses indeed supports the point of scholars of the religion of Islam. Let us look at it in detail. Muhammad recited the proofs of God to the people. I agree on this point, as the Quran was revealed to him. Did Muhammad teach them the law and wisdom? Let us see what law and wisdom means according to the Quran. And remember what is recited within your households of the proofs of God and of wisdom. God is subtle, aware. Chapter 33, verse 34. And there has come to them among reports that wherein is deterrence, far-reaching wisdom, but the warnings avail not. Chapter 54, verses 4 and 5. And when you divorce women and their term be reached, retain them according to what is fitting, or release them according to what is fitting, and retain them not through harm that you might transgress. And whoso does that has wronged his soul. And make not mockery of the proofs of God, and remember the grace of God towards you, and what he has sent down to you of the law, and the wisdom whereby he exhorts you, and be in prudent fear of God, and know that God knows all things. Chapter 2, verse 231. This last verse is the key to understanding what law and wisdom means. God has sent down the Quran. It is composed of verses. These verses can be split into proofs, which point to the existence of a creator and so on, laws, which are the commandments of God, and wisdom, which is sound judgment. Muhammad did not get any special wisdom from God. He was simply relating the verses of God and applying them and exhorting people by them. Through these verses, God was teaching men law and wisdom. I am thankful to Brother Garens for this insight. The next argument is we must go to Muhammad for judgment. Another argument put forward by those who wish to follow the Quran alone is that God commands the believers to go to the messenger for judgment. They equate going to the Hadith literature with going to a living person for judgment, which is a ridiculous proposition. Nevertheless, I concur that the believers were to go to Muhammad for judgment, and he was to judge them by the Quran. And they say, "We believe in God and the messenger, and we obey." Then after that, some of them turn away, and these are not believers. And when they are invited to God and his messenger that he judge between them, then are some among them disinclined. But if the truth be theirs, they come to him in prompt obedience. Is there in their hearts disease? If they doubt or fear that God and his messenger would deal unjustly with them, the truth is, these are the wrongdoers. The word of the believers when they are invited to God and his messenger to judge between them is that they say, "We hear and we obey," and these are the successful. And whoso obeys God and his messenger, and fears God, and is prudent fear of him, these are the triumphant. Chapter 24, verses 47 through 52. It is clear from the context that this is referring to people who did not come to the messenger for judgment during his lifetime. Since the messenger is dead, we are unable to apply these verses today. As I mentioned earlier, there are many verses in the Quran that applied to believers during Muhammad's lifetime. It is a nonsensical argument to equate false sayings attributed to Muhammad, which he neither read nor approved of, to the rulings of a living, breathing messenger. In any case, Muhammad was bound to judge people by God's scripture, as were prophets and men of God before him. And how come they to thee for judgment when they have the Torah wherein is the judgment of God, then turn away after that? And these are not believers. Chapter 5, verse 43. We sent down the Torah wherein is guidance and light. The prophets who submitted judged thereby those who hold to Judaism, as did the men of God and the religious scholars with what they were given charge of from the law of God, and were thereto witnesses. Then fear not mankind, but fear me, and sell not my proofs for a cheap price. And whoso judges not by what God has sent down, these are those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue. Chapter 5, verse 44. And we ordain for them therein the life for the life, and the eye for the eye, and the nose for the nose, and the ear for the ear, and the tooth for the tooth, and for wounds just requital. But whoso forgives it by way of charity, it is an expiation for him. And whoso judges not by what God has sent down, these are the wrongdoers. Chapter 5, verse 45. And we sent Isa, son of Maryam, falling hard upon them, confirming what was within his grasp of the Torah. And we gave him the gospel, wherein is guidance and light, both confirming what was within his grasp of the Torah, and as guidance and exhortation to those of prudent fear. Chapter 5, verse 46. And let the people of the gospel judge by what was sent down therein. And whoso judges not by what God has sent down, these are the wantonly perfidious. Chapter 5, verse 47. And we send down to thee the law right, confirming, and what is within the scope of the law, and as a control over it. So judge thou between them by what God sent down, and follow thou not their vain desires away from the truth that has come to thee of the truth. For each among you we appointed an ordinance and a procedure, and had God willed, he could have made you one community, but that he might try you in what he gave you varying laws. So why in good deeds unto God will you return altogether, and he will inform you of that wherein you differ. Chapter 5, verse 48. And that thou judge between them by what God has sent down, and follow thou not their vain desires, and beware thou of them lest they seduce thee away from some of what God has sent down to thee. And if they turn away, know that God but intends to afflict them for some of their transgressions, and many among them are wantonly perfidious. Chapter 5, verse 49. Is it the judgment of ignorance to seek? And who is better than God in judgment for people who are certain? Chapter 5, verse 50. The next argument is accept some hadith. Modernist scholars of the religion of Islam accept some hadiths are contradictory. They even concede that some hadiths are against God's commandments in the Quran. Yet, the desire to follow the footsteps of their forefathers is so great that they are averse to abandoning their false literature altogether. So they offer a compromise between wholesale acceptance of hadith and its complete rejection. Their position is that we must accept those hadiths that agree with the Quran and with our reason. This is a last ditch effort to save their beloved hadith from irrelevance. We are commanded by God to hold fast to the law, that is, laws in the Quran. And those who hold fast the law and uphold the duty, we waste not the wages of those who do right. Chapter 7, verse 170. Holding fast to the law means that we are to take the laws in the Quran as our only source of guidance. Half measures are not acceptable. The Quran is clear, complete, and fully detailed. What possible benefit is there in holding on to other means of guidance? Are we not denying God's authority if we take anything besides the Quran for guidance? For instance, a person brought up in the religion of Islam thinks that circling a stone idol 7 times is reasonable. If a hadith mentions this act, they would think that it is reasonable. What is reasonable to one man might not be reasonable to another. God accuses the Jews of cherry picking what they wanted to follow similarly. Then are you those who kill your own and expel some of you from their homes, assisting against them in falsehood and enmity? And if there come to you captives, you ransom them, but unlawful for you was their expulsion. Do you believe in part of the law and deny part? Then the reward of him among you who does this is only degradation in the life of this world, and on the day of resurrection they are sent back to the harshest punishment, and God is not unmindful of what you do. Chapter 2, verse 85. The only approach is to take all of the Quran and only the Quran as guidance and law. He it is who sent down upon thee the law. Among it are explicit proofs. These are the foundation of the law, while others are likenesses. Then as for those in whose hearts is crookedness, they pursue what is a likeness thereof, seeking the means of denial and seeking its interpretation. And only God knows its interpretation and those established in knowledge. They say, we believe in it. It is all from our Lord. But only those possessed of insight take heed. Chapter 3, verse 7. The next argument is that the Quran was not a book. Perhaps the most insidious argument of all is that the Quran was not a book written down during Muhammad's time. The Islamic scholars proclaim insistently that Muhammad was an illiterate man. They say that he was an ummi, which means illiterate, as it says in the Quran. Say thou, O mankind, I am the messenger of God to you altogether. Of him to whom belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. There is no God save he. He gives life, and he gives death. So believe in God and his messenger, the unschooled prophet who believes in God and his words, and follow him that you might be rightly guided. Chapter 7, verse 158. The word ummi does not mean illiterate. The following are verses that use the word derived from the same root as ummi. He it is who raised up among the unschooled a messenger from among them, reciting to them his proofs, and increasing them in purity, and teaching them the law and wisdom, though they were before in obvious error. Chapter 62, verse 2. And among them are those unschooled. They know not the law save vain desires, and they only guess. Chapter 2, verse 78. And if they argue with thee, then say thou, I submit my countenance to God, as do those who follow me. And say thou to those in possession of the law and to the unschooled, have you submitted? And if they have submitted, then have they been rightly guided. And if they turn away, then but upon thee is the communication, and God sees the servants. Chapter 3, verse 20. It should be clear now that Ummi means those who did not receive the law from God. It does not and cannot mean illiterate. Is it not strange that a man who received the revelation from God would not attempt to preserve this message in the form of a book in his lifetime? If his companions were transcribing the revelation, would he not verify their work? Muhammad was warned in the Quran that there were hypocrites in his midst. Let us be reasonable. Muhammad did indeed know how to read and write, and the Quran was compiled in the form of a book within his lifetime. It was not written down on bones of animals, cloth, or any other material conjured up in the imaginations of Islamic scholars. By a decree inscribed on parchment unrolled, chapter 52, verses 2 and 3. No, indeed, it is a reminder, so whoso wills might remember it, in honored writings, exalted, purified, by the hands of scribes, noble, virtuous. Chapter 80, verses 11 through 16. The truth is, it is a glorious recitation on a protected tablet. Chapter 85, verses 21 and 22. The scholars of the religion of Islam have used the gullibility of the masses to trap them. Their argument is that the Quran was compiled after Muhammad's death by his companions. If we reject the veracity of Hadith, which was compiled in a similar manner, then we must reject the Quran as well. However, from the above verses, it is clear that the Quran was written down on parchment while it was being revealed, and that its organization was also under divine guidance. The last argument is that the Quran is in Arabic. This line of argument assumes that Arabic is a special language which can only be understood by Arabs. The fact of the matter is that Arabic, like any language, can be learned. Native Arab speakers do not understand the Quran, as is evidenced from the very fact that they use secondary literature to explain the Quran, when the Quran explicitly states that it is complete, clear, and fully detailed. Please do look at my video in which I show verses from the Quran attesting to this fact. Language is not a barrier to understanding the Quran. God opens up His guidance to whom He wills. It is a noble recitation, in a decree closely guarded. None touches it save those purified. Chapter 56, verses 77 to 79. The fact of the matter is that Arabic can be mastered by a student willing to apply himself. Using the excuse that Arabic is not your native language and therefore the Quran cannot be understood is a defeatist attitude. I would suggest that you diligently study the various translations of the Quran while learning the Arabic language. Or you can continue to be fooled by experts claiming to know Arabic perfectly well while striving to misguide you from the straight path. And had we made a recitation in a foreign tongue, they would have said, "Oh, that is proofs for but set out and detailed. A foreign tongue and an Arab? Say thou, it is for those who heed warning, guidance, and healing, and those who do not believe. In their ears is a deafness, and it is for them blindness. These are called from a far place." Chapter 41, verses 44. I hope that you ponder over the verses presented in this discussion. It is now time for us to ask God alone for guidance and apply our intelligence to this great book. Our excuses will not save us when we are presented to the Almighty on the Judgment Day. May God guide you to the straight path.